Hi everyone.
Good evening and welcome.
What day is it today, Deb?
I think it's Friday.
And who is our guest?
I have no idea.
Oh, not this again.
I know, but one thing I do know is it's Codes of the Unknown.
Oh yeah. Good evening and welcome to Codes of the Unknown. I'm Andy, obviously, and tonight my guest is David.
Hello.
Hi. Do you want to introduce yourself? Do a little bit of a bio?
Sure. My name is David Thomas White. I have a long history of writing screenplays, novels, short stories mostly. I've also had a long history of unusual paranormal experiences. I have noticed that many people who have had honest experiences with the paranormal have, in many cases, had some form of near-death experience in their own life. When I was a kid, I had a couple of these. One time I had a reaction to penicillin that gave me 106 fever. And my doctor, knowing about how bad penicillin can be if you're allergic to it, gave me a second dose.
Oh.
And that darn near killed me. I remember my family saying I was hallucinating. I was talking about traveling to all these places I'd never been.
Yeah.
And it took me about a day and a half to come out of that. I also one time got hit in the head with a rock thrown by a friend of mine from down the street.
Nice friend.
Got 42 stitches in my head. Cut a flap of skin right off. And the funny thing was, my dad had just bought me my first T-shirt with a pocket.
Yeah.
To this day, it's the only T-shirt I've ever owned with a pocket. I put that T-shirt on. I walked outside. My friend from down the street sort of thought it would be funny to throw a rock at me as soon as I stepped out of the house. Creased me right across the skull. I went inside. I couldn't have been outside for more than 20 seconds. And I came inside and I was dripping blood. And my dad must have thought that was the first and only time he would ever buy me a T-shirt with a pocket.
You've never
and I
worn
passed
one
out
since.
on the way. It's God. I remember passing out in the car. He literally just picked me up under his arm and went to the car. It was a Saturday morning, so the emergency room was already full, and I passed out from loss of blood. Could have died right there, and I didn't come to until about an hour and a half later, when the doctor was stitching me up, and I could actually feel him tugging on my skin as he was putting in the stitches.
Yeah.
Since then, I've had other unusual experiences that include voices warning me when my action was going to be deadly. There was a time when my brother and I were pulling a tree down in our backyard, and we didn't want it to fall in the neighbor's yard because it would probably hit their fence and do some damage. So we had wrapped some chains around this tree. I had already gone up 2/3 of the way to the tree and taken a chainsaw and cut off the top third. And while I was on the ground, I had this chain, and I thought, hey, I could get better leverage if I wrapped the chain around my waist and pulled on it like this. And the tree began to crack, and it was coming towards us. And I heard a voice in my head said, do you really think that's a good idea? And I was thinking, well, yeah. And then I realized, oh my God, if this tree goes the wrong way, this chain is going to either spin me like a top or cut me in half. So I really quickly had to figure out how to loosen the chain and get it down by my feet. And when I got it down to the feet, the tree went the opposite direction, whipped the chain out from under me, hit a branch, which hit our picnic table. And I had my TV set out there to watch a football game outside. It brand new TV. I had never watched anything on that TV before. It flipped that TV onto the ground and smashed it into 1,000 pieces.
Wow. Jeez.
And I thought, if I hadn't had that little bit of warning, and it was an audible voice. It was as if somebody was standing 2 feet away saying, hey, you really think that's a good idea? So I know those kind of things happen. I know that means that there are unexplainable spirits, if you want to call them angels or disembodied spirits, whatever you want to call them, that can connect with us, that can help us in our time of need. There was another time where I was mowing the backyard, and we had a fence post, a round 4-inch fence post with a bird feeder sitting on top that was shaped like a cabin. And it had an eave and an overhang, and it looked really cute, but I had it sitting on the ground because I needed to redo the post. And as I was mowing, I realized I had to move the post and the bird feeder so I could mow around them. And I went to go get the bird feeder, and this voice said, move the post first. And I just ignored it. And then I heard the voice scream, move the post. I was like, okay, I'll move the post. I went to move the post, and my foot kind of brushed up against the bird feeder, and I got stung by a wasp. And then I got stung again by another wasp. And I looked down, and the bird feeder on the back had a wasp nest about the size of a small baseball or football. And I had gloves on. And if I had picked up that bird feeder with both hands, I would have crushed the wasp nest, and I would have been covered in wasps, and I wouldn't have made it inside the house. And I know from that moment, I heard a voice, and it didn't just say something to me the first time, it yelled it the second time because I wasn't paying attention. So those kind of things happen.
The voice that you heard, was it the same voice what you heard when you was in the tree? Do you know, or was it just?
It wasn't really. It wasn't really like. I mean, you couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. It was just. It was like words. It was audible words that I could hear. I've noticed in my dreams, and I tried to pay attention in my dreams. It's very hard to hear sounds in your dream. You can pick up communication, like there is almost like a telepathic exchange of messages and ideas, but actually hearing sounds is very difficult. And I don't know if that's because when you're dreaming, there's a different part of your brain that's not connected that normally you use when you're awake. But it was just sort of a presence in my head more than anything else. But I could definitely distinguish with that second event that there was a volume to the first one, and it was much louder in the second one, much more insistent.
So did you find that your experience started to escalate once after this near-death experience? I know you was young when it happened, but did it?
Not that I'm aware of. It took me until I was about 55 before I saw my first UFO, which I saw with my 3 children. And that was really just an orange light in the sky, but it appeared suddenly. I mean, one moment it wasn't there, then it was. And as we were watching it, I told my son, don't take your eyes off of that, because those things have a way of just blipping out when you don't look at it. And I moved off to light a bonfire. We were in our backyard, and he took his eyes off me and looked back, and it was gone in just that split second. But that wasn't until I was 55. And until then, I was begging, I was pleading to see a UFO because I wanted to know they were real.
Yeah.
About a year after that, my family and I saw two bright incandescent lights at the end of our driveway. At the time, we lived in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
There's no town within 7 miles of us. There's nobody across the street. It wasn't a reflection. And it
Yeah.
was as bright as an airplane's landing lights. And it was at the end of our 200-foot driveway. It looked like this thing was going to land in our yard.
Yeah.
And my kids could see it. And I said, okay, we're not going to make the same mistake we did last time. I want you to watch it while I go outside. And between the time I left our door and went around to the other side of a 5-foot wide maple tree, it blipped out. So
Wow.
it was almost as if it could tell when you take your eyes off it, that's the moment it's going to disappear or no longer be horrible.
Yeah. That's awesome. So what is your most what's the word?
My wildest story?
Your most memorable encounter.
Okay, so this one takes a little while to tell. And it was interesting when it first happened, but it's what happened 25 years later that kind of sealed it as very atypical, very unusual. In 1991, I was working in Chicago. I was born and raised in Chicago. I was a huge Chicago Bulls fan and a Bears fan and the Cubs fan. The three teams have a habit of breaking the hearts of their sports fans. So in 1991, the Bulls had a chance to make it to their first NBA finals to win a championship. And they were playing against the Los Angeles Lakers, who were an established team with established veterans. The Bulls were not. This was in June in Chicago. They actually hosted the first two games, and the Bulls lost the first game primarily because the referees couldn't figure out how to blow a foul. There were so many instances where the Lakers should have been called for a foul, and for whatever reason, the refs let them keep playing, and they basically steamrolled right over the Bulls. So because this was the first game at home and it was a loss, a lot of the Bulls fans were a little disappointed, but I had faith. I knew it was going to come out all right. Because I was running the booth for this convention in Chicago for our magazine, Electronic Gaming Monthly, I was hosting some out-of-town dignitaries from California and New York. We went to a really important restaurant in Chicago called Gino's East, which is on Superior. And there were, 6 or 7 of us in this booth, and we were in a room with maybe 200 people, very big room surrounded by booths. And in the very middle was about 4 or 5 tables all pushed together. And there were these LA Lakers fans there. But it took me a while to figure out they weren't just fans, because on one side of the table were all of these very well decked out, very gorgeous looking women, most of them in their early 20s or 30s. And then on the opposite side were a bunch of old white men. And at the end of the table was this white guy in his mid-20s with like a white afro, like frizzy hair. And he was just saying the most awful thing about the Bulls. He was saying how they were going to sweep the Bulls and they didn't even have playoff caliber and blah, blah, blah. And you could tell these were Lakers fans because they were all wearing purple and yellow, which is the Lakers colors. And they were laughing and jeering the Bulls, and nobody in the restaurant said boo. Nobody said a thing. They were all just taking this. And at one point I looked around and I thought, somebody's got to say something. And I finally couldn't take it. I said to my guests, I said, excuse me, I have to make a scene. And I stood up and I went, hey, really loud. Everybody in the room stopped and they both looked at me. And I said, you guys, you're guests here. You should act like guests. The only reason you won this game is because the refs swallowed their whistles and they couldn't figure out how to call the damn foul. And then a couple of people were, yeah, that's right. That's why yeah. And I said, not only that, you guys aren't that good. I mean, you needed all the help the refs could give you and you only won by like 5 points. And people were like, yeah, that's right. Yeah, you tell them. And I said, not only that, once the refs figure this out and the NBA clowns back in wherever they're based figure this out, they're going to let the Bulls play like they should play. And the Bulls are going to win the next game tomorrow. And people were like, yeah, you tell them. And I said, not only that, they're going to win the next 3 games in Los Angeles. In fact, they're going to sweep you right off of this playoff. And people were like, yeah, tell them. And then I pointed to the guy with the frizzy hair who was doing all the trash talking. And I said, and when you walk off that court in Los Angeles after the 4th game in a row that you're going to lose, I want you to look up in that camera And I want you to know that I'm looking back at your stupid face and I'm laughing my ass off. And everybody went, yeah! And the place erupted. People are yelling, they're cheering, they're throwing napkins in the air.
Yeah.
And the people at that booth in the middle, they just put their heads down and they're like, oh, what have we done? And the weird thing is, the Bulls won the next game. And then they went to Los Angeles and they won the next game and the next game and the next game and the next game. And when that team walked off after the third game in a row that they lost at home, which they hadn't done all season, this guy with the frizzy hair looked up in the camera and went, oh, like he was remembering what I had said to him.
Yeah.
It was like I had laid a voodoo curse on the team. And I'm sure it went from the players' wives, which is who those women were, back to the players, and they went, Sugar, you know, there's some white dude back at a restaurant say you ain't going to win another game this playoff. And it probably settled in their psyche, and it just fed on them. They lost one game, then they lost the second, and a third, and a fourth.
Wow.
And I always felt like, you know, somehow that must have gotten back to Michael Jordan and the rest of the Bulls. Hey, there was a guy in one restaurant who, like, put a voodoo curse on the players' wives and the coaches. And so I lived with that, and I thought that was cool. And my friends were watching the playoffs with me, and when the Bulls won 4 games in a row, they were like, Dave, you were right, it happened. So fast forward 25 years later, I'm in Chicago. I'm a member of a UFO and experiencers group, and I was invited to a different UFO group because there was a gentleman there who was a twin, and his twin brother had passed away recently.
Right.
And he was looking for somebody that could help communicate with the dead. Yeah. And I mean, some people have claimed that they can do that. I know that Harry Houdini spent a majority of his adult life trying to find somebody who could do that so that he could communicate with his deceased mother. Yeah. And with all the years and decades he spent, he never found one honest psychic that could do that. So I'm always a little hesitant and leery when that kind of thing comes up. You can see a lot of really bad fakers on TV who claim that they can speak to the dead, and I don't believe a single one of them. Yeah. Sorry. So I show up at this guy's place. I'm the last one to arrive. There's only one seat left in his rather large living room. There's about 20 people in there. And the only chair that's open is this ladder-back wooden chair next to a table with a lamp on. So I go over and I sit down, and they're doing introductions, and they get around to me, and I start talking. And while I'm talking, the lamp next to me flickers every time I say something. Yeah. With each word. And they're looking at me like they think I'm doing a parlor trick or something. And I'm looking at the lamp like it's just a normal lamp. I touch it and nothing happens. And the guy next to the lamp on the other side says, oh, it's just the table. And he starts shaking the table. And I went, no, that's not it. And when I said, no, that's not it, the lamp went dee. And the owner came over really slowly, walked over towards me, reached his hand out and turned off the light. And that was it. Which is, it just as a little bit of a microcosm, that's the way a lot of people in their reality treat the paranormal. If they can't explain it, they'll just turn it off and pretend it doesn't exist. Yeah. So I spent time with this group. They invited me back a couple of weeks later. And when I came back, it was just this guy and me and 2 of his friends. And we were talking about a lot of different subjects. And one of his friends was an inveterate sports know everything. He could recite, you know, baseball scores, football scores. He could tell you who was the best free throw shooter from 1957 and how many he made and how many he missed. He had a photographic memory for stats. Yeah. So I told him this story about how I believe I helped the Bulls win their first championship in '91. And he's smiling while the whole story is going on. And then when he gets done, he says, that's a nice story, but you know it never happened. And I said, well, yeah, it happened. I lived it. I know it happened. He goes, no. The Bulls won a championship. I'm like, what are you talking about? They won 6 championships. They would have won 8 if Michael Jordan had taken a year off to try to play baseball. And he's like, no, believe me, no. The Lakers won the first 2, and then Portland won these 2, and I realized as I'm listening to him, he had a different reality than I did. Right. And his buddy, who was like right next to him, says, yeah, you ought to listen to this guy. He never makes a mistake. He knows everything. He's won every trivia contest. And I realized, I said, you know, we can settle this right now. I told his buddy, get on your phone, look up who won the championship in '91, and then look up how many championships the Chicago Bulls have won. So he starts going through his phone. And I talked to the other guy and I said, now look, I'm not saying you're lying, but I guarantee you in the next 20 seconds, you're going to have a life-changing experience, because the world and the reality and the history you think you've lived is going to disappear, because this is my reality. And we're in my reality where the Bulls won 6 championships, including the one where they swept the Lakers in 4 games after the first loss. And he's like, no, that's not possible. And his buddy's looking at his phone and goes, dude, and he hands up his phone, and this guy's face just fell. It was like all the blood just drained out of his face. I thought he was going to pass out. and it showed me that the smallest little change, they call it the butterfly effect in weather, where the effect as little as a butterfly beating its wings can have enormous ramifications on the other side of the planet. It's possible that the littlest things that we do can make enormous changes. In the latest Doctor Strange movie, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, there's this cute little scene where this pizza vendor on the street wants to get paid, and he starts, going back and forth with Doctor Strange, and Doctor Strange does a little magic trick, and the guy starts punching himself in the face. Well, that actor gave an interview this past week where he explains that he helped save Doctor Strange because that one little interaction extended the time that Doctor Strange stood there on the sidewalk by 45 seconds. And that meant that when Doctor Strange tried to cross the street, he didn't get hit by a taxi, which would have hit him if he had been in the street just a few seconds. Now, I'm not saying he changed that, but the actor is saying that's how important that little bit of interchange was to the whole scope of Doctor Strange. I'll give you another example, and this one you can actually look up in books, although it's kind of garbled because history doesn't always record the events as they really happen.
No.
A couple of years after this Chicago Bulls experience, I was watching the Chicago Cubs, the baseball team, at Wrigley Field in Chicago. I was sitting in the right field bleachers. Back then, they were only $5, and the beer was $2. So for $10, you could have yourself a heck of an afternoon. And they were playing their hated rivals, the New York Mets. Now, the Mets had beaten the Cubs in 1969 when the Cubs arguably had a better team, and they kind of fell apart in the playoffs. So the Cubs have always had it against the New York Mets. And they had a pretty decent player playing in right field by the name of Joel Youngblood. And Joel Youngblood was not a bad player, except he could play almost every position. So he never got to stay in one position game after game. They moved him all around. So this particular day, he was playing right field. And the other fans in right field were just heaping abuse and trash talking to this poor guy more than they were watching the game. And there were kids in the stand. And I finally couldn't take anymore. I said, hey, stop swearing at the guy. He's just doing his job. Leave him alone. If you want to, embarrass him, do something a little more memorable. And they're like, oh yeah, well, what would you do? So I said, leave it to me. So I stood up on the bench, and just as I was doing this, the stadium got really quiet. I don't know if it was just my memory, but it was right in the point where the pitcher is looking at the catcher, and the catcher is flashing signs between his legs to the pitcher about what pitch he wants to do. And I guess the pitcher couldn't agree on what pitch because it was taking them a little while. So nothing was going on. Nobody was making any noise. And at the time, I had been a singing telegram messenger in Chicago for about 6 years.
All right.
So I had a really developed voice. I was really loud. So I stood up on this bench and I started singing, "Young blood, get off of our field. Your skills in baseball are so unreal. Better run, blood. You're just no good, blood." And people started laughing their butts off. You could hear people clapping and cheering and yelling. And this poor guy, he had his hands on his knees. You could see him put his head down and just shake his head like this. And then he turned to look over his shoulder at me. And just as he did, there's a crack of the bat. And he whipped his head around really quick, and the ball sailed right over his head. Bounced off the ivy. He had to run after it. The guy who hit the ball got a 2-run double. It was hilarious. And he was so embarrassed. And the coach of the team was so upset that they fired him from the team in the middle of the game. They traded him to another team from Canada, the Montreal team. which happened to be playing in Philadelphia that day. So being the journeyman that he was, Joel Youngblood catches, I think it was a plane. They flew to Philadelphia and wound up having to play that night and got a hit that night.
Yeah.
And because of that, he was the first baseball player in history, I think he's still the only one, who was able to get 2 hits for 2 different teams in 2 different cities on the same day. And because of that, he's now in the Hall of Fame.
Wow.
Okay, so the next time he's back in town with Montreal, I'm there in the right field bleachers when he runs out before the game, and I'm like, Joe, I got you in the Hall of Fame, man. You owe me big time. He's like, yeah, man, thank you. It was up to you. I wouldn't have been in there by myself.
Yeah.
And that moment, that synchronicity between when he looked over his shoulder and when the pitcher pitched the ball and the batter hit it, it had to have been exactly that time. If it had been 5 seconds earlier, 5 seconds later, it wouldn't have happened. If it had been hit anywhere else, if it had been an infield grounder or to left field or center field, it wouldn't have mattered. No. It would have been a routine out if he had just been watching the batter. And the only thing that could get him to turn around was me being incredibly obnoxious and loud and gathering the crowd together to a point where it was just instinctive and natural for him to look away from the game.
Yeah.
Those kind of things can happen, and the littlest thing like that gave him an opportunity to get into the Hall of Fame by getting a hit in another team. And the interesting thing is, those 2 pitches that he played against, those 2 pitchers, both made it into the Hall of Fame because they were really good pitchers, and he got a hit off of each one in the same day. Those kind of things are unique, but they can happen. They have. There's a book that was popular back in the late 80s, early 90s called The Course in Miracles, or A Course in Miracles. And all it really basically tried to teach people who read it was that miracles happen every day. If you can get a kid to laugh when they're in pain, that's a miracle. There was this time where I was driving through a suburb near where I grew up, and for unknown reasons, I pulled into this parking lot at a grocery store. I don't know why. I hadn't planned to go to the grocery store. I didn't have anything I needed to buy. And that grocery store I had never been in before. But for whatever reason, I said, okay, I'm going in. And I walked inside. And as soon as I walked inside, I heard a kid crying, like screaming really loud. And I walked over to the freezer section, and this kid had her hand on the glass when somebody else slid the door open, which is why you don't see sliding glass doors in the grocery store anymore. Almost all of them swing out. And it had tripped her hand, and she couldn't get her hand out. And they were going to find some tools to take the door off because they were afraid if they pushed it forward, it might, pull her hands off. Yeah. So I went up to the front counter and I bought a little $6 stuffed animal, a little orange and black striped tiger. And I walked back over and I said, hey, this guy really wants to help you. And I gave her this doll, and she stopped crying. And then I walked out. I went back to my car and I went driving to wherever I needed to go.
Yeah.
And I never went into that store again. And I was just there visiting a couple of years ago, and that store has been torn down and it's something else now.
Right.
But it's little moments like that where an individual can make a difference, and that difference makes all the difference from that point on.
Yeah. Yep. It's so strange. Oh, don't know what that was.
Oh, that's somebody sending me texts.
Oh, right.
Dave, where's that grocery store? Was that the one in Lyle? Yeah, that's the one in Lyle.
Right. We have got a couple of questions, so I'll do them first. So the first one's from Ryan. He would like to know, do you go out investigating?
No, I usually find that they usually come after me.
All right.
There are a lot of places that appear to be haunted because of bad things that have happened at those locations, hospitals, nursing homes, that kind of thing. I feel uncomfortable in those locations, partly because your imagination begins to imagine all the horrible things that could have gone on. People without their loved ones having to die alone, those kind of things. I don't feel comfortable in those situations.
Right.
So no, I don't actively go out and find them. I have been in houses in the past. In fact, I'm looking at buying a new house, and I can go into a house and tell right away, oh, this place is haunted. Yeah, this place is haunted. This is great. A haunted location is not necessarily a bad thing. There are people who actually would like to have those kind of experiences and would actually pay more money for a house that is haunted.
Yeah.
So, yeah, to make a short answer longer, no, I
No,
don't
that's
usually go
fine.
out
But
there.
don't they now? I don't know if they do it in the UK, but I know in the US, if someone's selling a house and they believe it to be haunted, they have to, by law, add that into the agreement.
I've looked at a lot of seller awareness documents, and nowhere on there does it say haunted.
Does it not?
No,
No,
I
I've
meard they
that
want to know if it's got
say it, but I didn't
asbestos.
know
They
how
want to
true it
know if
was.
they want to know if it's got lead paint. They want to know if it's any physical problems, but haunted.
No,
And in
nothing.
fact, I'm willing to bet that more houses would probably sell for a higher amount if they were haunted than if they
Yeah,
weren't.
right. Yeah, I just didn't know how true it was, and no one. I've asked a few people, but no one seems to know. So, yeah,
Yeah, I've seen a lot of seller awareness documents, and no, it never says anything about that.
nothing. Right. Next question is from Nickname. I'll give her a bit of a heads up on this one. Has David ever had an MIB encounter?
Only one. So back in 92 or 93, we were doing a second magazine along with Electronic Gaming Monthly called Computer Gaming Monthly.
Yeah.
And I wanted to have a section called The Men in Black, which was based around the technology and the people behind the new technology that was coming forward. Back then, virtual reality was new, 3D computer games were new. So we wanted to focus attention on those people. So we called it The Men in Black.
Yeah.
And one day I was going to have a meeting with 4 of the guys from our magazine company in a suburb called Downers Grove, which is where I was renting a house at the time. And the 4 of them met me in my house before I got there. So I came in the back door. I left the back door open so they could come in. And I get inside, and the 4 of them are furious. They look like they've been in a fight, and they're all mad at me. And I said, what's the problem? They're like, oh, you know. And I'm like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, yeah, like you don't know. I'm like, guys, I have no idea what you're talking about. So they go, well, look outside your front door. So I said, okay. So I go outside the front door. There's a little porch about 10 feet wide and about 5 feet deep, about 6 feet off the ground. And I can see across the street, and there's parking on the opposite side. Yeah. And about 2 car spots down, there is a magnificent, showroom perfect 1960s black Cadillac. I could see it had red, either leather or cloth in the rear window.
Yeah.
And I could tell it had a violet glow coming from the front passenger side of the car. And I'm staring at this vehicle, and then I realize there's a guy with his head sticking out the window where the driver's seat is, who is completely hairless. It's not just that he was bald, but somehow, even at that distance, it was like 30 feet.
Yeah.
I could tell he didn't have eyelashes. He didn't have any hair. And that was beyond what my eyesight would have been able to see. And while he's got his head, he's literally leaning back and looking out the window like this. While he's got his head facing backwards, he pulls the car out into the street and drives away and never looks forward.
Wow.
And we didn't talk about that for about 20 years. And when we had a reunion of sorts a few years ago, they were like, oh, that happened. No, we didn't do that. We thought that was you. And that scared me off of discussing UFOs for a while. I spent the next 10 years researching ancient architecture, megalithic stonework, the evidence that there was a much, much more advanced civilization making stone monoliths around the world. I mean, from Machu Picchu and areas around Cusco to Egypt, Turkey, all around the world. And I later came back, and I've since written 2 episodes of a series that I call Silencers, which goes more into the Men in Black. And as far as my research can show me, there are multiple Men in Black species. There's definitely some military CIA types that are pretending to be men in black, who use that scary persona to gather up information or evidence or whatever people might have so that it's not passed around. There appear to be some sort of reptilians who can shape change to look like us, but not perfectly.
Yeah.
It's almost like they can connect to the reptilian part of our brain and make us see what they want us to see, but it's not a perfect cloaking device. There's little remnants that they can't cover up. There appear to be some sort of robotic androids. There's a really famous event where there was a man and a woman who were talking to a man and woman, men in black, who were asking them if this is how people kiss, and they were practicing kissing like birds pecking. Okay.
Right.
And the human male that was observing this noticed that the man had wires running from under his pants leg in his skin down to his sock.
Oh.
which makes no sense. And there's another famous event which I use in my first episode of a doctor who was giving hypnotherapy treatment to two guys who had seen a UFO and then witnessed snow falling inside their house. We've since figured out that if certain types of propulsion devices ionize the air, you can get this kind of weird effect, which the people in Mediterranean areas like Italy used to call angel hair. That's where the term angel hair pasta comes from. It falls out of the sky, and if you try to catch it, it's like snow. It just melts away.
Yeah.
So this doctor had been treating these two students. He gets a call from somebody who wants to interview him. And before he can put down the phone and walk across to turn on the lights for the outside of the building, there's a guy at his door, and he lives in the middle of nowhere too. No car showed up. Nobody drove or walked up. He was just there. And when this guy comes in, he's dressed like an undertaker. He's got a black Homburg. He has an absolutely pristine suit with not a crease in it, not a single hair out of place, and he too had no hair. Now you can shave all your hair as much as you want. You can use Nair and get rid of all the stubble, but you can't pull the eyelashes out of your eyes. No. That would damage them so that they would never look the same. So somehow this guy had zero hair, which to me makes it sound almost like he's not an actual physical entity. He's like a projection almost.
Right, okay? Like a hologram.
So this guy tries to warn him off of doing any more hypnotherapy with UFO people. And he says, you have 2 coins in your pocket. One of them's a penny. Take it out and put it in your hand. And the doctor's like, well, yeah, I do have a penny in my pocket. Yeah. Says, so as he's holding it out, this guy's looking at the coin, and the coin begins to have a glow around it, and then it vanishes right in front of right out of the doctor's hand. And this man in black says, you know, this Dr. So-and-so who lives in one town over? And the doctor says, yeah, I know him, but you won't be able to talk to him. He's since passed away. And the man in the black says, just as you have no penny in your hand, he has no heart, which the doctor took to mean a threat. Like, you keep going and you'll die like this guy. And then this man in black starts having this weird effect where his voice begins to drop like he's running out of power. And he actually says, I have to go. I'm running out of power. And he walks to the door and goes outside, closes it, goes down the steps before the doctor can like shake his head away. And he runs after. And the being has gone around the corner. There's a brilliant blue flash, and he's gone.
Right.
And the doctor goes after him. There's no car. There's nowhere he could have gone. There's no houses nearby. There's a street and a bunch of empty fields. And this really freaked the doctor out. But he was honest, and he came forward and he reported what had happened. And there's dozens of stories like this from otherwise reputable people whose reputations could only be harmed if they shared these kind of stories. So you have to believe some of these people have had really impossible experiences, but they're there, but they did.
Yeah, that's it. You can't say they're lying just because you didn't see it. So
it's tough these days because we're finally at a point where anything we say on YouTube or on TV or that the government releases is more likely to be a fake than real.
Yes.
And that's just the reality we're in. CGI is so prevalent that you can't rely on what a video shows you. You can't rely even on what you think you're seeing. That being said, the 5 current UAP videos that the Pentagon has released are, I believe, it's just part of a continuing disinformation program. They've been using disinformation about UFOs since before Roswell, since back in 1942. If the way that you can tell whether or not the government wants to be honest, and I'm talking about right now just the U.S. government, but the British government, the U.S. government, and Australia and New Zealand, they have pretty tight coordination between their militaries and their intelligence bureaus. And if they wanted to be honest, they wouldn't show us new videos. They would go back into the past and show us radar tapes from the Phoenix Lights from 1997, I think it was. They could show us the radar from the Stevensville UFO encounter, where a UFO the size of a super Walmart overflew the ranch owned by then President George Bush. They had onboard radar from the 2 jets that were chasing it. If they want to be honest about UFOs, release that information. Release the information about Shag Harbor, where a submerged UFO with lights on was joined by a second UFO also underwater, and then after some tinkering around, those 2 UFOs continued underwater to a base in Canada used by U.S. submarines. I got to think there's some military, intelligence that was generated from that event. Release that information. You want to be honest, you want to be open, show us those things. Show us, what happened. There's a really famous event that happened in Tehran back in 1974 when it was still run by the Shah, and they were using U.S.-made F-4 Phantom jets. And there was a giant UFO shining a white light straight down like a spotlight at this spot somewhere not far away from the Tehran airport. So they vectored in an F-4 with the orders of making it leave, which means firing a missile at it. And when it got just to within 20 miles away, where it was just going to be a radar lock-on, everything in the jet failed. Not just the electric, not just the engine, but the hydraulics as well. It basically turned into a flying brick. And the only thing they could do was hammer the controls to get it to steer away from the UFO. And when it got back out to the 20-mile range, everything came right back on. So those guys left. They sent a second F-4 in. The same damn thing happened. Everything failed. The likelihood of a complete, everything in the plane shut down at the same time,
shutdown.
Right, in 2 different planes is mathematically almost impossible. Except the second time, when the second jet was leaving, a little red UFO left the big one and came towards them, and they thought they were getting shot down by a missile. And it circled around their plane and then went back to the UFO and merged back with the UFO. And the next morning, they went looking in the ground where this UFO had its light shining down. And it turns out it wasn't interested in a military base or anything defense or, that kind of area. It was looking at an old woman's garden. It was shining a spotlight in her garden. Okay, you want to be honest with the American people. You want to be honest with the world. You want to share what you know. Release the information about that event. Show us that these creatures, these beings, whatever they're doing, they don't mean us harm. If they wanted to have us harmed, they would have shot those 2 F-4 downs just like that. If they could turn everything off, I'm sure they could do something much worse. But they don't. And there are so many events that the Phoenix Lights alone is a perfect example of how many of the world's governments, and I would include Britain, France, Germany, probably Russia and China, definitely Russia, China, do not want their people to believe that we can't control our own airspace. It would make their air forces look unnecessary, which in a sense they are. If they really wanted to be honest to the world, release all the evidence that they have. I'm sure there are hundreds of incidents that have military engagement with classified reports, probably classified radar at the same time, and make those available. Back when, in 1974, there's no way that was a hologram. There's no way that was something that our governments were using. The Phoenix Lights, too, in 1997, as soon as that event happened, the U.S. military dropped flares west of Phoenix about 2 hours later, about 10 o'clock at night. And then everybody says, oh, it was just flares. So they were deliberately trying to obfuscate the event. So I don't think our governments yet are being honest about it. And I have serious doubts about some of the people that are current big names on the UFO circuit who I think are just part and parcel of this whole UFO disinformation campaign.
Right. So do you think,
which is sad to say, but I will say once you have admitted you're a disinformation agent for the government, you're always going to be seen that way.
Yeah. I was just going to say, do you think that these people, unnamed people, do you think they are working for the government? Or the government have told them this is what you need to do?
In fact, we've been able to go back and see how some of the most well-known debunkers, Philip Klass is a perfect example, who was actually taking a check from the government for saying the thing he did, which was basically to deny every UFO that has ever been seen. So I think it's a continued problem where, at least with the U.S. government, they've done so many illegal and possibly lethal things to cover up UFOs in the past that they still are not comfortable coming forward. A perfect example is back in the 80s, there was a hearing that became known as the Church hearings because of Senator Frank Church, who was leading this. And they wanted to look into things like assassinations in the United States. Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, and a number of other people, which the evidence seems to suggest were being created by a CIA. So the head of the CIA at the time was getting embarrassed at all this information coming out. So he ordered his people in the CIA to put together a document that has since been called the Family Jewels. You can look this up on Google. The Family Jewels is a numbered list of all the illegal things the CIA had done up to that point that they were willing to admit. And they were horrible. They included dosing a town in France with LSD through their water supply without asking permission and without ever telling the people in France what they were doing. What the hell? Why are you doing that? It talks about the multiple times they tried to assassinate Castro, even though they claimed over and over again they weren't. They fessed up and said, yeah, we're doing that. And there's all of these horrible, nasty, illegal things that are not allowed by their charter to be able to do. But the number one thing in the Family Jewels to this day is still redacted. There's a black box over number one, and we don't know what it was. And there's two following pages, because there's a list, and then there's pages of evidence of what these things entailed. There are two full pages completely redacted of what number one was. Now, there's only two things that the CIA has been accused of that they can't admit. One of them is the connection with the CIA assassination of John F. Kennedy. And there seems to be enough evidence to at least go beyond the reasonable doubt that the CIA was involved. They were directly threatened by Kennedy. He said, I'm going to smash into a million pieces and scatter the dust to the winds. He was really ready to blow up the CIA. And they knew that. The only other thing besides the John F. Kennedy assassination that the CIA could not admit would be UFOs. So whatever number one is, it's either the JFK assassination or it's UFOs. But one of those two is still so secret, still so classified that we can't admit it.
Right.
I had a chance to talk to Nick Redfern on a podcast back in 2017, where he was talking about his two books, the first of which is called Bodies in the Desert, which was based on the information given to him by three unknown anonymous sources. And anonymous sources are pretty much worth exactly what you think of. They're not worth much. But Nick Redfern trusted these three sources. He knew who they were. He just couldn't say who they were. Bodies in the Desert, unfortunately, is full of impossibilities. In a nutshell, it says basically that the Roswell crash was a U.S. test that was done with captured Japanese scientists from World War II who were part of their illegal bioweapons, bioterrorist group that were doing things like testing radiation on Chinese prisoners of war. And at the end of the war, so that they would not be found guilty of war crimes, which they should have been, they turned over all their documents, the ones that they didn't destroy, and turned themselves into the U.S. government, thinking that the U.S. government would want their help against the Russians, which apparently we did. The problem is that there is almost zero chance that we could have had Chinese prisoners survive the killings that the Japanese scientists clearly went through. There's evidence that they did everything they could to get rid of any possible witnesses. They've even dynamited the buildings where they did their experiments. And to think that this is the story that Nick Redfern is promulgating in his first book, Bodies in the Desert, that it's Japanese scientists testing radiation and air sickness on Chinese prisoners of war from World War II, it just doesn't make any sense. The weird thing was he didn't get criticized that much by leading members of the UFO research community, like Dolan, people like that. I believe, I don't have any proof of this, I believe they felt like he was making a deal with the devil where he would put this theory out there. And in return, the government would share some of the information with Nick Redfern and kind of bring him into the circle. So I had a chance to talk to him when he was on a speaking tour about the sequel to the first book. And I said, look, I don't want to argue about whether this story happened or not, whether your anonymous sources are feeding you a load of crap or not, because if people want to see that, they can find that online. What I asked him was, I want you to tell me if it's possible that at this late point, we're talking 70 years after Roswell, that whatever happened at Roswell had to have been something so serious that the government is still trying to lie about. That is, depending on how you count it, the fifth or the sixth supposed final explanation about Roswell. And every single time they say, well, we were lying about the last one. This is the real story. Every single one has been a lie. And it's been a lie claiming that the previous one was a lie, but this is the truth. And I said, there's only two possibilities in my mind. Tell me if you agree. Either we were doing some horrific medical experiments that we can't still admit to, except we've admitted things like using the Tuskegee Airmen as tests for syphilis to find out just what it does to the human body. And we tested these people by telling them we were giving them free medical care while dosing them with syphilis and letting them die horrible, agonizing deaths over many, many, many years. We admitted that. There's nothing we could admit that would be worse than that. I said, if it's not that, then it has to absolutely be some kind of UFO event, which may involve the government forcibly quieting some witnesses, meaning putting them off. And he says, that's a funny thing you would say that because, and then he went for 10 minutes saying, yeah, I agree. I think it's very possible that the government's still lying to us about Roswell because whatever they did, they covered it up too violent.
Totally agree. Right, got another question relating to this, and then we'll go for a break. So Joe is asking, who inputs the info into Google?
Who inputs info into Google? Well, they have, I believe, thousands of people that curate the articles. Google is basically human made. You can go to Google right now and say, I want to create a page about me or my project. Okay. And you can put links in it. The links are pretty well traveled. People say that Google isn't trustworthy. Well, it's not the article you have to look at. You have to look at the sources. You have to look at the links. And there are thousands of people that regularly pore over Google documents to see if they're accurate, to see if they're honest,
Yeah.
and to say this is a stub, we need more information, or things like that. There are definitely gatekeepers, let's say, not just
Yeah.
on Google, but throughout academia.
Oh yeah.
Graham Hancock, who's, I think, a pioneering ancient builders investigator, has not been allowed to do a TED Talk because they
Right.
still consider what his information is as not credible. And it's like, but it's every chance he gets, he's able to document it with
Yeah.
physical evidence and with more and more evidence. His theory from 20 years ago that there was a great cataclysm that ended the Lesser Dryas event is now seeming more and more likely. We've now found evidence in the layers of non-terrestrial material that could have only come in from either a comet or a meteorite at exactly that boundary. So yeah, we're at a point. The problem though is we at the same time that we can't trust some of our sources, we are also getting some of the best science humanity has ever had. We now have a telescope like the Webb telescope, which can show us farther back in the universe than we've ever had a chance to see before, with technology that allows us to see through the dust clouds, through the otherwise obstructing material, into areas that are literally, tens of billions of years old. That's trustworthy. That's science. And the fact that we were able to get the Webb telescope into space, where it had more than 300 single point failure issues, where if any one of those had failed, the whole thing would stop working. Every single one of those worked because our science, when we work together, is amazing and can accomplish near miraculous things. We used to think that plate tectonics was a myth and a fraud. And the poor gentleman that invented that, or didn't invent it, but came up with that theory, was laughed to the dying days of his life. And then after he died, some scientists went, you know what? Maybe he's right. And he is right.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have to at the same time accept so much of what science has given us, but we have to also double check those sources and make sure that they're telling us everything. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're withholding material like Graham Hancock's work that they don't think we're mature enough to use.
Yeah. No, because I was searching some stuff on Google the other day. Someone had sent me some links, and I could not find anything on Google in relation to this stuff. Yeah, I know I've seen it on there in the last couple of years, and it's just been complete. I was going to use Go Duck or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I've not used that yet, but it's like I thought, no, I'm going to keep. I went about 12 pages deep into Google, nothing, and it's like, how can it just completely vanish? Obviously, there's people that are just removing it.
It's not just that. I'll give you a great example. Try finding a Men in Black event, an actual Men in Black event. You've got 3 movies, you got a TV show, you got all the combined interests of the major actors that you have to wade through. You have to go through about 15 different not this restrictions in your Google search before you can actually find an actual Men in Black event.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's intentional, but that's the kind of thing. It's not you're finding plenty of information. You're finding lots of results. You're just not finding the results you're looking for.
No.
Okay. It's not that it's hidden. It's like, go outside and try to find a car with a purple interior. There's a car out there with a purple interior somewhere, but you might have to go through a million cars to find it.
Yeah. It's there somewhere. It's just finding it. But you'd think
information overload. Yeah.
You'd think with Google being as big as it is that it'd be at least in the first 2-3 pages, but I just give up after 12. I thought, I'm done.
I'll give you another example. So you're familiar with MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a really good friend of mine from Chicago who's high up in the MUFON ranks. When I had my first UFO experience back around 2007 or 2008, somewhere around there, I dutifully went to the MUFON website and I registered it. I logged it. I took pictures the next day of where I saw this orange globe and how high it was above the trees, what the size was, the direction, everything. Put it on the website. Then I thought, hey, I'll do a search to see if I can find anybody else who might have seen this. So I'm looking around and I find a UFO event that happened about 40 miles away. At the time, I lived in Northeast Indiana, and there was an event in Northwest Ohio, just adjacent to us, about 40 miles away. That was the most incredible UFO event I've ever heard. There was a man with his 2 kids who were playing in the yard, and he was washing dishes overlooking their deck, which overlooks a sloping yard. And the sloping yard kind of goes down to the end of their property, and their kids were playing down in the corner. And he could hear them playing, and he's washing dishes, and he realizes he can't hear them anymore. So he stops, and he goes out on the deck, and above the kids' heads is a floating being that he described as a cross between a shark and an octopus, floating over their heads. And the kids are so terrified, they can't even speak. And he's terrified because this thing's now floating towards him at eye level. And he tries to call out to his wife, and he literally can't make a sound. And finally, his wife's like, George, where are you? George, are you out here? And she comes out, and she sees the same thing, and she's frozen in fear too. And this thing comes right straight towards them until it's about 15, 20 feet away. And then it just aims up to the sky and goes phew, like a bullet. Okay, that's what this UFO report said. I didn't make a copy of it. And I came back about 2 weeks later, and it wasn't there. And I was so frustrated. I'm like, I know it was here. I know the year. It was 2004. I know the location. Gone. Somebody took it out. So years later, I'm talking to this MUFON organizer. And I explained this event to him. And I waited until there was a MUFON meeting, and almost everybody had left. The only people who were left were his wife and him and me. And he and his wife and I were carrying things out to his car. And I waited till his wife was headed to the car, and I said, you got to tell me, is MUFON hiding these events? And at first he goes, oh, no, that couldn't have, they probably pulled it out because it's not real. It's not possible. They probably just curated and figured this is just bogus. And I said, no, this guy sounded like he was dead serious. And finally, after a while, this MUFON guy, he looks out of the hallway, he looks both left and right, makes sure there's nobody coming. And he says, I have a really good friend of mine who was videotaping this exact same creature, the exact same description, and the thing attacked him. And he said, at least I'll have this on tape before I die.
Wow.
And I'm like, no shit, really? He says, yes, but you can't, but he says, you can't tell anybody this. Now, in our research, there is a heavy bit of suspicion about MUFON giving its best cases to Robert Bigelow, the guy who's involved with Skinwalker Ranch, and that they were siphoning off the good stories so that he could look them over, or his group could look them over, and then the rest of the public wouldn't see them. And on this same podcast that I had a talk with Nick Redford, the guy following Nick was the head of MUFON for Indiana. And I said, can you find this event? Oh, sure, Dave, sure. If it was in our database, I'll find it, no problem. And I never heard a call back. And a couple of years later, I asked another person from MUFON, hey, can you find this event for me? Here's the year, here's the location. Oh, yeah, we'll find it, no problem. Never heard back.
Nothing.
So there is an ongoing attempt being made to not let the world's public find out all the truth, because frankly, I don't think we could handle it. We still can't. I mean, I hate to be the Jack Nicholson of the group, but we can't handle the truth. There's still a sizable number of people that think the earth is flat. Okay. God, the Greeks figured this out 2,000 years ago. Why can't you? Because they have a distrust of the government and science. And too much of science these days is so expensive, you have to have government support. You have to have government aid. And because of that, they deny everything NASA says. They deny everything the CDC says. They deny everything that the WHO says. And then they become a party of deniers, and they don't want to believe the truth. I remember having discussions with friends of mine who were very devout Christians who believed without a shadow of a doubt everything alien was demonic.
Right.
That those were demons in the sky, and they're here to steal your souls and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And no matter what you give them as evidence, they will twist it around and see it for what they think it is, which is a shame. But that's where we're at. And that's why I think that these UFO events that select people are being shown is their, whoever they are, is their effort to clue each one of us in on a level that is personal, so that we don't have any more doubts. And it has to get to a point where, I don't know, 50.00001% of the human race acknowledges that we are being visited, and then maybe that's the 100th monkey effect, and we can be accepted into whatever the next level is.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you. Right, we're going to go for a break. We have got some more questions. If anyone else has got any, please put them in caps, and we'll see you in a few minutes' time.
So I'll be here. Are we on break?
Eight, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hello, and we're back. It's all right. I wasn't ready either. Don't worry about it. I was just trying to catch up on some of the chat. A lot of it's missing, so if Joe can send me the bits that I need, that'd be great. Thank you. Right, so we'll jump in straight with the questions again because we've got quite a few to get through. Right, I'll just do them in order, if that's all right with you.
Sounds good to me.
Right, so the next one is another one from Joe Weeks. Can you tell us about the timeline collision, please?
It's still to this day one of the most perplexing things I've gone through, and I've been through quite a few things in my life. There was an event where I directly challenged, let's say, the way that history was going to go. That there were these powers that be, these machinations, whatever, belief systems, maybe, that the Bulls were going to lose their first playoff series and the Lakers were going to win. And because of that, the Bulls would probably dismantle their team and they'd never have a championship. And the Lakers would have a whole bunch. But because I stood up and I intimidated these 20 people, which included players' wives and the coaches for the Los Angeles Lakers, they believed what I was saying, that they were going to lose the next 4 games in a row. And they did. And it was an event that, because I was there, like the time I was there at Wrigley Field and helped get this in the Baseball Hall of Fame, one person's actions changed some of history. Now, to be fair, Michael Jordan is possibly still the greatest basketball player that's ever played or will ever play the game. He wasn't just a physical, god playing this game, but he was an intimidating presence on the court. He did not want to lose. He did not want to lose at anything. And he led that team on the court. Yeah. But it doesn't hurt to have somebody put a voodoo hex on the coaches and the players' wives who might be affected that way too. Yeah. And it didn't seem to make much of a difference. The Bulls were clearly the best team for 6 of the next 8 years. But when I met this guy, he had a different timeline. He had a different world that he was coming from. He had lived in California. He had been there all his life. He had seen the games that he thought he had seen. He had memories. He had stats. He had statistics coming out his elbows from the reality he had been in. Yeah. And as I was looking at him and watching his friend, Googling, what actually happened in the NBA in 1991, I was looking at him and I realized one of our 2 realities was going to vanish in the next 20 seconds. And it was just going to collapse. And we now are struggling with our tiny 3-dimensional brains trying to encompass the concept of not just a multiverse, but a multiverse filled with an infinitely number of branching realities. I could walk out this room right now and a million things could happen to me. And each one of those million things has a million things branching off from them. Yeah. And we struggle. I mean, Dr. Strange, to their credit, tries to do a decent job so there are different ones of us living in different dimensions. There's Strange 818 and Strange 217, all the different ones. Yeah. But we can't grasp that. We still can't grasp that we live in a universe with trillions of galaxies. And no matter how far you can look, you can never see the edge of the universe. We just can only see the edge of the perceivable universe. Because whatever we can see to the edge of, that's also perceivable by somebody on the other side of their perceivable universe, with just as many galaxies in the way between them and that horizon as from what we can see to our horizon. And that's just one universe. Yeah. We can't grasp that. We can't begin to grasp the concept that every moment you're creating a new timeline. Every single action you take makes a different timeline. And people on your show are probably familiar with the Mandela Effect.
Yes.
which is named after people thinking that they saw the funeral of Nelson Mandela before he actually died.
Yeah.
I've had one very intense Mandela Effect moment where I was in my garage. This is back in Northeast Indiana. We had two cars there, a Jeep and a Dodge van. And my Jeep had an oval sticker in the back hatch window that said 13.1, which is
Yeah.
how many kilometers there are in a half marathon, 13.1. A full
Right.
marathon is 26.2.
Yeah.
And I bought this car used with the sticker already on there. And at the time that I bought it, I told the person I was with, my ex-wife, that I couldn't have bought that car if it had 262 on the end, because that reminds me of the Me-262, the jet fighter from World War II. Bad karma, bad juju, I wouldn't have bought it. But 13.1, 13 is my lucky number. It's a palindrome, so it's 13-1, both directions.
Yeah.
But it was a good omen. And she thought I was nuts. So it's like, okay, fine. So when I brought it home, I explained this to my kids. Hey, 13.1, lucky number, backwards, forward, same direction. And this one night, I'm walking through the garage. The garage door is closed. I'm walking from one side of the Jeep around the back towards the other side, towards the van, and I froze. I literally just froze in place. And I don't know why I stopped. It was like something just grabbed me and held me. And I was looking around like something's changed. I could tell something has changed, but I didn't know what it was. And I'm looking around. I'm looking at the garage. I'm looking at the van. I look at the Jeep. And the sticker on the back of the Jeep says 26.2. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was like, that's it's not possible. It's not. And I went in to talk to my ex, and I had to actually wake her up. And I said, what's the sticker on the back of my car say? She goes, 26.2. I said, no, it doesn't say. It says 13.1. She goes, well, go look again. I said, no, I just looked. It says 26.2. She goes, well, that's what I said. I said, no, it's not possible. And the next day I asked my kids, I said, what's the sticker on the back of my car? And they all said 13.1. I said, I know. You remember me telling you, you told us the story, Dad. You told us a million times it's your lucky number. I said, well, it's not there anymore. It's something different. Yeah. And the moment that I realized that sticker had changed was like a thunderbolt had struck me. And I froze in place. It I don't know how to describe it. It should not have been. That should not have happened. I felt like I jumped the rails, like I jumped from the right reality into the wrong, where I had actually made a conscious decision. If that thing had said 26.2, I wouldn't have bought that Jeep. So how do we jump these timelines? I don't know. I think it's possible that we are each on our own timeline, and when we go to sleep and wake up, we have to refresh that timeline, and sometimes we wake up and we're on a different time. So
do you know of any incidences where it's gone from one timeline to another? So say like you had the 13.1 and you've gone looking again, it's 26.2, and then a few days later you've gone back and it's gone back to 13.1. I'm just using that as an example.
No, I haven't seen it actually correct itself. No. I will say that there have been odd occurrences. I'll try to clarify this, or I'm going to kind of quantify it. There have been odd coincidences that I have noticed concerning sports victories, where you have an entire community, sometimes a global community, all pulling for one team or the other, and their combined energies are such that things in their reality shift. I'll give you two examples. When the Bears won their Super Bowl championship in 1985, there was a lot made of the fact that they had what was known as bear weather, which is cold, windy, snowy, because they played outside and a lot of teams play inside. And if they were used to playing outside, they would have an advantage. Well, when they played the Super Bowl, which was held in New Orleans that year, in February, it was unseasonably cold. It was like 40 degrees, which, temperature-wise, it's about 8 degrees above freezing on the Fahrenheit scale.
Yeah.
And even though they played it indoors, the commentators were making a joke about how it was bear weather outside. And the Bears won, and 2 days later, that same cold front moved slowly across the Caribbean to Florida. And on the
Yeah.
Tuesday following the Sunday Super Bowl is when we had the cold, freezing weather over the launch site for the Challenger. And that's when it developed icicles on the O-rings around the Morton thiokol boosters. And when they launched it, it blew up because it was not supposed to operate in that cold temperature.
Yeah.
And it almost seemed like the cold weather that was following the Bears went and did something bad. If it hadn't been bad weather, and the reason that people want to look at conspiracy theories, there's a nice little area you can delve into. What happened with that space shuttle blowing up was directly because the president at the time, Ronald Reagan, was going to give a State of the Union address that Tuesday night, and he was going to do a live link up with the astronauts on the shuttle, and he was going to announce some big deal with what he was calling his new Star Wars program.
Right.
And because they had to do a live link up that night, they had to launch that rocket that day. And the people at the launch site said, "Sir, it's not safe. We shouldn't be doing this. We should wait until the weather clears tomorrow." Tomorrow was too late. He couldn't do his surprise uplink to the space shuttle.
Yeah.
So there was a call from the White House to the rocket site, and they said, "You're gonna go. We're telling you you're gonna go." And they said, "No, we're not going to." So there was some time, and then there was a second call, and we believe the second call was from the president himself saying, "I am ordering you to fly." And they flew, and it blew up. And one of the things that was interesting was a couple of reporters said, "Hey, can we see a copy of the speech the president was going to give? Because we've heard rumors he was going to talk to the shuttle astronauts."
Yeah.
And they destroyed all copies of the speech. And that shows it's like anybody who wants to claim that Roswell never happened is perfectly fine to say there's no evidence, except there's the evidence of absence. What I mean by that is 6 months of all communications going to Roswell Army Airfield surrounding the July events connecting the crash to the airbase. 6 months of all their communications mysteriously disappeared, supposedly lost in a fire. All 6 months. No other base anywhere in our country ever lost 6 months of all of its communications, except Roswell, and only for the time period right around where that crash. That's if nothing else, that shows that somebody enacted a cover-up. Just like Reagan's speech 2 days after the Super Bowl in 1985, where he was going to talk to the space shuttle, and he ordered them to fly, and Ronald Reagan and his advisors have to take direct responsibility for that explosion. They have to, because they ordered them to fly.
Yeah. So can I ask you, what are your thoughts or theories on the 7 astronauts not actually being on board?
Well, it came out later. Well, okay. So we know that when the cabin hit the ocean, there were at least 2 members alive because they had activated the emergency oxygen masks, and they could tell that as enough oxygen had been depleted to at least keep 2 people, if not 3 people, alive for the entire time that it went down to the ocean. So we do know that there were people on board. There's almost no way that they couldn't have been on board.
Right.
And another little side note to that, apparently to get their bodies back to the base without being intercepted by too many newsmen and curious reporters, they brought them back to the base in the back of a garbage truck.
Really?
And that's been verified by a couple of people, and we don't hear that. We don't hear people talking about that. That was incredibly disrespectful, and I understand the reason for secrecy and all, but they definitely made a huge mistake, and they never wanted to take credit or blame for that.
No, because there's a lot of stuff going about that. The woman, I can't remember her name, one of the women, she was a teacher. There's a couple of guys that are scientists and professors, and they've all
Sally
been
Ride.
Sorry?
Sally Ride is the woman you're talking about.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't remember the name at all. And then one of the other guys, he's an actor now or something. So I don't know how true any of this is. It's just things on the internet. I just wondered if you had any idea or any knowledge of what's gone on?
Well, I'll move the conversation a little further, even still.
Yeah.
So we've had a number of people, including David Wilcox, who used to be on the Gaia programs,
Yeah.
and his puppets, I guess, is the nicest thing I can say about him. Some of the people like Corey Good, who have claimed to have gone to Mars on multiple occasions, spent 20 years there working, and then brought back in time so that no time has elapsed, so that he could
Yeah.
work there and come back and like still retain everything he's done here. That's just a bunch of malarkey. That's just a
Right.
horrible story. A good science fiction writer would come up with a much better story than that. He's the same guy, I believe, that claimed that there was a UFO that crashed in Antarctica, and it was when Antarctica had green trees and grass, and they dismantled the UFO and built a base out of the UFO, and that they're now there uncovering it from the ice. Except when David Wilcox asked him this in an interview, he said, "How long has this been there?" He says, "Oh, about 50,000 years." And David Wilcox blinked and says, "Don't you mean 500,000 years?" And Corey Good goes, "No, 50,000 years." And you could just see Wilcox just like drop his head in dismay because he thinks this guy just screwed up, because no, there wasn't green grass and trees in Antarctica 50,000 years ago.
Right.
Not even 500,000 years ago. Probably not even a million years ago. We have millions of years of ice core samples in Antarctica. That place has not had trees and grass for a very, very long time.
Right.
And so for the people that think we have bases on the moon, bases on Mars, we now have China photographing the entire surface of the moon, including the dark side of the moon, because in some ways they are leapfrogging past us in the space race. And they would like nothing better than to come back to America and say, your imperialist running dog government is wasting your money on this base, and here's the evidence. There is no evidence. There isn't. If we had a base on either the moon or Mars, not only would we be sending multiple missions up there to resupply them, but there would also be outgassing of things like CO2 and methane and lots of other gases for whatever was going on the surface. We can't just scrub all of that out. There would definitely be heat signatures. There would be so much evidence of mining and tunneling if we were going to put them under the surface, that we wouldn't be able to hide this from the Chinese or the Russians or the Indian Space Agency or the European Space Agency, all of whom are involved now in space in a way where it was just us 30 years ago. We don't have bases on the moon. We don't have bases on Mars. I wish we did. I wish we were able to do that, but we don't. I guarantee you, if people like Elon Musk had a chance to go to Mars instead of just going up to the atmosphere and back, they'd go there. Now, that being said, there are some interesting UFO events that have happened in the past that clue us into what's really going on. I'm working on one screenplay right now that deals with the events that happened with President Eisenhower back in 1954, where supposedly he met with aliens and agreed to some kind of deal, some kind of a treaty. It's not really clear exactly what happened. It is clear that Eisenhower did disappear that night, and one of the morning papers actually ran a story that he had died in the middle of the night. And we're not really sure how they got that story, but that had to be retracted, except it did get published. And the following cover-up was that he went to visit his dentist in the middle of the night.
That's the one I heard.
Yeah, except that doesn't exactly pan out. There's some problems with that explanation. Just like every explanation of Roswell since 1948 or so, none of them have panned out either. There's holes in every single one of their explanations. So there are things that our governments, I should say, are probably aware of, and are probably doing whatever they can to keep us on the right side. I believe that there are definitely elements of our government that want us to fear the aliens, that want us to think they're dangerous. And the vast amount of evidence says if they wanted to take over, they could have taken over 2,000
Oh,
years ago.
yeah, they'd have done it by now. I believe
And
that. Anyway.
there does seem to be evidence that they are trying to make contact and slowly acclimatize us to their presence. And
Yeah.
not just their presence, but their vastly superior technological and possibly dimensional presence. I would say that the Pentagon wants to be the king rooster in the hen house
Yeah.
and doesn't want us to have any loyalties to anybody else but them. And I think the current 5 UAP videos that they've released are awful. They're bad. They're badly done in a way that makes you think maybe the Pentagon doesn't know what the heck they're doing. And I think it's just designed to make us doubt anything that we get as far as UFO material on the internet. You can't trust anybody. Even the Pentagon was fooled, quote unquote. Unfortunately, that inevitably casts aspersions against those people who claim to be in the know and who claim that these are real UFO events. They are not. None of those 5 UAP videos show a white Tic Tac object. None of them. If they wanted us to have the information, they could release the information that the ships and the airplanes recorded of the 2004 Nimitz events, and they aren't going to release those, either because they don't have them or because it confirms exactly what we think we know, or it's just really badly done and they can't show us. One thing people can look into is there was an event that was covered by a website called The Drive, thedrive.com. They normally cover military matters, technology, things like that. They covered an event that happened in 2017 in October, where a white tubular, you could call it tic-tac shaped object, was spotted on radar leaving the Las Vegas, Southern Nevada, Area 51 area, flew southwest into California, and at greater than Mach 1.5, some reports say, made a greater than 100-degree turn and headed due north, paralleling commercial airline traffic from California to Washington State. We know this because in 2018, they declassified the radar for this, and all of the voice communications between the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the pilots, and this other fellow who apparently had a code name that was redacted in the audio transmissions that alerted the FAA that this guy was in charge of live weapon assets that were being sent to intercept whatever this thing was and shoot it down. Now, in previous FAA events where MUFON, for example, wanted to get the radar transcepts from the Stevensville event, the FAA lied through their teeth, lied in court, said, no, we don't have any tapes. Then they came back, well, yeah, we have some tapes, but there's nothing on it. And the judge sent them away, look harder, came back a third time. Well, yeah, okay, there's some jets on it, but they're not doing anything abnormal. The judge said, I'm getting a little worried. Maybe you should really try harder. So they came back like a fourth time. Well, yeah, the jets were there, and they were playing around with their afterburners, but they weren't chasing anything. And the judge says, I'm going to start throwing some asses in jail if you guys don't show me the truth. Finally, after lying in court, I don't know how many times, they finally showed the FAA tapes that showed radar of 2 F-16s on afterburner trying to chase this UFO that just goes, boop, and it's just like light years ahead and leaves them in the dust. The FAA by nature doesn't want to clarify UFO events, except in 2017 with this thing that went from the Area 51 region north, and it was far enough away from these commercial jetliners that they couldn't make out any control surfaces. They couldn't see if it had a tail, couldn't even tell if it had wings or jets, but they could tell it was going much faster than them, and they're probably traveling not quite Mach 1, probably 500 miles an hour at 30,000 feet, and this thing is a couple of miles east of them, and it's just passing them like they're standing still, and at some point it drops off of visual. Now, when there were people putting in a Freedom of Information Act request, a FOIA request, they figured they'd go through months, if not years, of stonewalling about the FAA. Except this time the FAA said, here you go. Here's everything. And gave them not just the radar, but the audio communications between the pilots, the FAA, and this redacted person's name. And I think it was because that particular object, which I should point out, October of 2017 is only a few months since August of 2017, which is when To the Stars finally announced they had their hands on these first 3 UAP videos, and supposedly had connections with the pilots, David Fraser, and other information that these UFO events had happened in 2004 with a white Tic Tac. So a couple of months goes away, and then here's this white UFO Tic Tac thing flying along U.S. airspace, and the FAA cooperatively gives everything it can to prove that that thing is real. Now, when these tapes came out in, I think it was February of 2018, it wasn't 2 months, sorry, it wasn't 2 weeks until Vladimir Putin said, oh, you've got flying Tic Tac. Well, we've got better. We've got nuclear-powered stealth cruise missile. And he had his big March 1st press conference about the stealth cruise nuclear-powered missile that in his video targeted Florida as if it was going to hit Mar-a-Lago where the president was living.
Yeah.
And it looks like that was our government saying, we've back engineered UFOs, don't mess with us, we've got much more than you have. And Russia says, oh, no problem, we see your UFO and we counter you with nuclear cruise missiles. It's almost like they deliberately pulled Putin off his chair to come in and make a, I'm going all in bet.
Yeah.
And since that moment in 2017, there have been at least 2 other events in the southwestern United States where a white tubular cruise missile type of craft has flown very close to commercial airline traffic as if it was trying to show that it could do that.
Right.
And I think that whatever that is, that's the next generation of possibly stealthy cruise missiles that the United States has that can go supersonic, which is really not that hard, except they can't do the kind of things that the 2004 Nimitz event claims they could do. They don't hover. They don't stop and make right-angle turns.
No.
In 2017, made a long, sweeping supersonic turn, but it surely wasn't. Sorry, I'm getting a phone call now too.
Oh no,
it
you're
surely
okay.
wasn't anything that could considered unnatural by a flying body, a jet or a missile. And I think we definitely have some technology that we haven't seen yet. It was a decade before the SR-71 Blackbird was admitted to exist, and it was about that long after the F-117 first stealth fighter was actually being used before it was admitted to be, available too.
Yeah.
Except I don't think we have the technology right now to duplicate the giant flat-sided triangle ships that we're seeing hovering over Phoenix and Stevensville and places like that. I think it's highly unlikely that if we had that technology, that we wouldn't have already used it in combat, because our military, the United States military, it wants more than anything to win every war it's in, and to use as much new technology as possible so they get more funding for more technology. And if we had those kind of things, we used the F-117 just as soon as it was available. We used the Apache AH-64 helicopters in the Bosnian War before it was even accurately tested. And 2 of the only casualties we had in the entire Bosnian War were pilots for the AH-64 helicopter because they crashed because they weren't properly tested before we rushed them into combat.
Yeah.
And with that kind of legacy of the U.S. military bringing into combat whatever it can as quick as it can, I think if we had flat-sided triangles that could hover and do the kind of things that we observe with these types of UFOs, we'd have seen them in Iraq. We'd have seen them in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
We'd probably see them in Ukraine right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Right. We've got about 11 more questions. Can we fit them in 20 minutes?
Okay.
Do you
All of
think?
a sudden, you're very quiet, and I'm not sure why.
Oh, am I?
I'm going to play with my phone a little bit.
Yeah.
and
Is
see
that
if
any
I
better?
can diagnose the problem being on my.
Can you
Can
hear
you
me?
hear me any better?
Yeah, I can hear you clear.
No, I can't hear you very well at all, and I don't know why. I think it was because I got a phone call, and that phone call messed up my audio.
Right.
Let me just check here for a moment. I'm going to. I think it's the government trying to ask me some questions without having to go through chat.
Anything?
Not very well.
No.
I wish I
Right. What
could.
I'll do.
Let me see here. Oh, wait, hold on. How about now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Just barely. How about now?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, sorry.
Nothing.
You're very quiet. I'll try to listen a little better. Actually, you know what I might do is I might just put in my earbuds, and I could probably hear you better
Someone
that
just
way.
said, can you try putting earphones in? While you do that, I'm just going to reply to someone that sent me an email.
The miracle of modern technology.
I know. Terry, I received your email.
Much,
Is that better?
much better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just going to send a quick message out. Terry, I received your email. I'm going to reply to you over the weekend. Just give me a chance to look for a couple of things, and I'll get back to you as soon as. Cheers. Right. Yeah. So what I'll do, if you just do like a quick fire on the questions, is that all right?
Sure.
Yeah. Right. So the next one is from Warren Hardcastle. Does David think the different elements of the phenomena are all linked?
I'd like to know which phenomena exactly. Are paranormal events and UFO encounters linked? It's possible that the people who are open to seeing paranormal events or experiencing paranormal events might be the same kind of people who are open to being contacted by UFOs, non-human intelligences. It's possible that one or the other allows a better appreciation of the other. It's sort of like the chicken and the egg, which comes first.
Yeah. Thank you. Next question is from Nickname. What does David think about the UFO phenomena?
I think it extends way back in our past. I think beyond 4000 BC, when supposedly the bearded white men that Graham Hancock writes about came back and reset humanity. It's interesting to note that there's a 6,000 year gap between roughly when Göbekli Tepe was started and the rise of Sumer and Egypt and the civilizations in South America, and 6,000 years from then until now, when we're having much more contact experiences. I can't say that they're on a 6,000 year loop, but it's just an interesting coincidence.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Another one from Nickname. Can David remote view? And if so, what have you remote viewed?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that a good yeah or a bad yeah?
Yeah, it's kind of scary. I've written a book called Eternal Horizons on the Trail of the Templar Treasure, whose main character I based off of my ability with something called psychometry, which is the ability to touch an object and see moments that happened when that object was in contact with somebody else.
Right. Okay.
Psychometry, remote viewing, and a few other things all seem to be very common elements that are grouped together. I think every human has these abilities. We just haven't had the ability to train with them, to learn how to excel at them. Swimming is not something that we normally take for granted. It takes some practice and some skill to be a good swimmer. But babies can swim when they're infants. It's just that we unlearn that because we don't practice it regularly.
Yeah.
That may be why young children are more open to seeing disembodied beings, their invisible friends, and why they might be open to paranormal events more than adults, where we've unlearned all of that information.
Yeah. Thank you.
So yes, remote viewing. I've done remote viewing. I think the
Yeah.
coolest thing is I've had experiences in my dreams that have later come true accurately enough where I have actually seen faces in my dreams and
Yeah.
recognize them when I see them in real life as being people I've seen in my dreams.
Right. Sorry, something's just flew in at my monitor. I'm just trying to see where it was and where it went. Like a
Flew
bug.
at your monitor?
Yeah, a bug just come flying past me. I went head into it, and now there's nothing there.
Is it because I said disembodied spirit?
You could, do you know that as well? It flew straight in front of me.
Yeah,
Because I've got two monitors on,
yeah.
and the one on my left hit it right in the middle, and there's like nothing there now. I'll fight with that later. So someone's, where's it gone? This is not a question. It's more of a, well, it is a question. Would you come back on and do a show purely on remote viewing?
Sure, whenever you'd like.
Excellent. Thank you. Cheers for that.
I have some interesting stories about remote viewing too.
Yeah, I love all aspects of remote viewing. Is just right up there. I need to get into it. It's just having the time to start doing it and then like processing it all. So once I do, then hopefully I'll be seeing and touching and looking for stuff if I ever get that far. So right, I found it and it's gone. The bug. I got the bug.
Oh, the bug. Okay.
Yeah,
You got the
yeah.
bug.
It's dead.
You know, they have a vaccine for that these days.
Yeah, different type of bug, I think.
Yeah.
Right. Another one from nickname is, any more MUFON stories that you have and that you could share?
That I could share, not as interesting as the paranormal events.
Right.
I mean, MUFON is, I give them a lot of credit for trying their best to get people to come forward and record their UFO experiences. I think that's very helpful. I think it's great to have a database that can
Yeah.
be searchable where you can find other people in the area that might have seen the same event. The possibility that they might be selling out to Bob Bigelow and other people like that and not keeping the best reports online.
Yeah.
I can't prove that that's happening, but I've heard that from more than one source, and that's difficult to accept. But it's the corporate way of life. There's money to be made in so many of these things, and I think that's inevitable, unfortunately.
Yeah. Thank you. Next one is Ancient Ruby.
I will say,
sorry.
let me just add to this. MUFON does an exceptionally good job of tracking down information using FOIA sources. What we know about Stevensville only came out from the dogged efforts of MUFON people in that region to continually go back to the courts and force the FAA to release the information that they had, proving that that UFO was being chased by two F-16s on Afterburner. MUFON did a really good study. They made that study public. You can see it on YouTube. It's one of the most well-researched and open investigation UFO events that's happened in this country. They do a great service. I just wish it was a little bit more open than it is.
Yeah. Yep. No, we've had one guy on who's part of MUFON, Earl Grey. You probably know him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's been on a couple of times, and we've got.
I love his tea.
Oh, have you heard his music? It's even better.
No, I haven't.
Oh, yeah. If you watch the last show that he was on with us, he actually gets his guitar and he sings 4 tracks that he's written.
Cool.
I'll send you the link to it. So he's talking about UFOs and everything else, and yeah, he does a bit of singing and guitar playing. So it's really good. Yeah, I just thought I'd throw that in there. So next question is from Ancient Ruby. What motive does David have to tell of his accounts? Is he not afraid? Thank you.
I started a book once called The 10 Times I Almost Died. It actually
Right.
started off as The 5 Times I Almost Died, and then I had 5 more of those experiences.
All right.
And it's up to, I think, 12 right now, where
Yeah.
um, once you've gone through a near-death experience, it's not quite as scary the next 7 or 8 or 9 times. I mean, yeah, we're going to die at some point.
Yeah.
I'm more concerned that people think I'm doing this to become more famous or more wealthy or whatever. On my business cards, on my letterhead, I have a quote from Ray Charles, who
Yeah.
once said, "I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to be great."
Yeah.
And I understand that. I understand that because in my writing, I want to be a great writer. I don't really
Yeah.
care if I sell a lot of screenplays or novels. In fact, I've never published any of my novels, and my
All right.
short stories that are on vocal.media, you can read for free.
Yeah.
I'm more concerned that people will think I'm doing this to raise my reputation or whatever.
Yeah.
I would much rather people understand that I'm just a normal schmo like everybody else. And if I can experience these kind of experiences, that's definitely something everybody else can do too.
Oh yeah.
I urge every single person that's listening to this, when you go to sleep at night, give yourself a suggestion of some place you want to see in your dreams, whether
Yeah.
it's a different timeline or a different location. Just give yourself that little permission. Okay, it's okay for me to go visit the coast of France or to go look at Mars and investigate it myself. And then when you wake up, the first moment you realize you're conscious, don't do anything. Just try to recall your dreams. Just sit there and listen to your dreams and try your best to remember them.
Yeah.
So many people have told me, "Oh, I don't remember my dreams. I never dream." Well, that's not true. Everybody dreams. If you don't dream, your brain actually starts to misfire. That's why you
Right.
can't go 36, 48 hours without sleep without your brain beginning to short circuit. It
Yeah.
needs that downtime. And I've had multiple instances in my dreams where I have recently in the last year, on 3 different occasions, I've seen an object in my dream. I've written about it in a story in the afternoon, and by the evening, I've seen that same image online. And
Right.
there, in each one of those 3 instances, I never saw that object before. It wasn't something I was remembering and had a dream about. It was something I first saw in my dreams, and then
Yeah.
saw it only after I used it in a story. And that tells us that our dreams connect us to other realities, maybe other versions of ourselves. I
Yeah.
definitely believe that deja vu is nothing more than a memory of a dream we've had of a place we have visited in our dreams that we are going to then visit if we're on the right timeline. And
Yeah.
that deja vu experience is something like a roadside, something that's telling us, yes, you're on the right path. You were here before,
Yeah.
you're here again. And I
Yeah.
know lots of people have deja vu who don't think that they have dreams, and yet I've tried to convince them deja vu is just a product of your dreams.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Next one is from Warren Hardcastle. Who would David reference as his greatest influencer or influencers?
When I was a kid, my dad, who was an engineer, like a design engineer, he was
Yeah.
also a Marine. He served in China before World War II, protecting civilians with a handful of other Marines before it got too dangerous and they all had to leave.
Yeah.
He went on to become a designer and an engineer, and he loved science fiction. He used to read Ellery Queen mysteries, but he also used to read Isaac Asimov short stories.
Right.
And he asked me on more than one occasion, "What's the fastest way of traveling in the universe?" And our normal answer would be, "Well, faster than light, hyperspeed." And he'd say,
Yeah.
"No, thought. You can think yourself from here to the other side of the universe by just
Yeah.
thinking of it." And he asked me that enough times that I'd never forget. He always wanted to know what the truth was behind UFOs, and he passed away in January of 1977, and he never got an answer. So
Yeah.
I spent quite a lot of my life trying to find what I would consider a good enough answer that I could tell him, and say, this is what I believe to be the truth.
Yeah.
But that's led me to try to find other answers, like how did people in Sacsayhuaman move an 80-ton block of stone next to a 50-ton block of stone and have them seamlessly joined together as if somebody had cut them with a knife? And the only answer I can come up with is they had a higher technology than even we have today.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely something. I was actually watching a program on that the other day, and it's like he said it's as if you say 50-ton rock, and the cut in it is so precise.
So the other interesting thing is Sacsayhuaman has one particular stone that's a big, giant, massive cornerstone that looks like somebody melted the rock with like a poker, like a hot poker, like it was wax.
Oh, right.
You can actually see where the stone drips down. Okay?
Oh, I'm not seeing that.
There is a legend of these two children that supposedly came up out of Lake Titicaca near Bolivia and walked north to found their holy city of Cuzco. And they supposedly had two magical from the god items with them. One was a golden rod, just a staff, which they poked at the ground. And supposedly the only place where it would go into the ground was where they should found their city. And it sank in this valley, and that's where they built Cuzco, according to the legend. The interesting thing is Cuzco is on a direct line between Easter Island and Giza. And there's no way for them to have drawn a straight line starting with Cuzco or starting with Giza and hitting Easter Island. The only way they could have done that was knowing where Easter Island was originally and knowing where Giza was and finding a midpoint in between where it forms a perfectly straight line, which means somebody was able to calculate where Easter Island, which is 2,000 miles off the coast, to calculate where that is and where Giza is and what's directly in the middle. The other legend attributed to these two, called the Children of the Sun, was that they had an object that they carried with them, which I am associating with the handbag of the gods. If you've ever seen the carvings of the bird-headed creatures with wings that are carrying what looks like a bucket, they call that the handbag of the gods. There's this other legend with the Children of the Sun that they carry this object with them called the axe of the gods, or the axe of gold. Gold because not that it was made of gold, but that it had a beam as brilliant as the sun, and it looked like it was a golden beam. And with this, they could cut stone as easily as we cut butter with a knife.
Right.
And wherever we see this megalithic stonework, we see this weird stepping stair pattern. We see that throughout the Middle East. We see that in Central America. And there is a carving done by a native Incan person who was trained by the Spanish and wound up being sort of an intermediary between the Incan people and the Spanish when the conquistadors came in. He sent a long document with hand-drawn pictures back to Spain saying, please, Spanish king, be nicer to the Incan people. They are my brothers. Treat them with a little bit more respect and honor. And in one of the pictures, he shows the legends of the people with the axe of gold standing on a stone being dragged by a bunch of other people. And in this guy's handbag is the stepping stair pattern, which this guy knew about in the 1500s and put it in his drawing because that's the legend that they had.
Yeah.
So there's something that we have yet to figure out about who the people were and what the technology was that they used. And if we are being visited by off-world entities or extra-dimensional entities, who's to say that they aren't the same ones that built places like Sacsayhuaman and maybe carved out the Sphinx 10,000 BC?
Yeah. That's it. We're never going to know, are we?
Yeah.
No. Right. We've still got a few more questions, but we've only got a couple of minutes. Well, we can go over a bit if you want, if that's all right with you. But,
sounds great.
Yeah, just we'll try and keep it a bit brief because we've got 2, 4, 5, 6.
You haven't even asked me about the. You haven't asked me about the Knights Templar yet, have you?
No, not even got there. Not even close.
Okay.
So the next one is from Ryan. What does David think the stone tape? Oh, what does David think of the stone tape theory?
I'm not sure what he means by the stone tape theory. I'm not sure I've heard that one.
It's when it's like what's it called? Residual, like a residual haunting, and it keeps happening over and over. And they say it gets recorded in the stone. So I thought it's like limestone. Yeah,
I've got lime scale in my
lime.
bathroom, but I don't think that's what you
It's
mean.
been a long day. Yeah, so they say a lot of stuff gets recorded in stone. So, and it's like
Yes.
it's just history keep repeating itself over and over, like
Um,
replaying itself.
I think our science has been able to accurately lay out the ages of the Earth that we've been on. We can now look at the ice core samples that have little bubbles of air in them, and from those bubbles of air, we can measure what the atmosphere was like at the time, and we can see what the carbon dioxide level was 400,000 years ago, what the air quality content was. We can now measure tree rings in ancient temples in Egypt and elsewhere that we can tell from those tree rings when those pieces of wood were cut. Our ability to measure our past is pretty accurate. That being said, it's quite possible that anything that's more than 275,000 years old would have rusted away, iodized, oxidized, and basically vanished if there was a higher level civilization prior to ours. But it's unlikely that they would have been able to live at the level we do. I mean, we've got 7.5 billion people on this planet, and we are literally changing the planet. And it's impossible for us to have had another civilization of 1 billion people or more without us finding some kind of footprint. We are finding evidence of a previous series of civilizations in South America in the Amazon, but I think we'll find that they're contemporaneous with other civilizations in Central and Northern America, possibly 4000 BC, maybe a little before then. And I think what's really going to be interesting is when we can finally start excavating areas under the ocean that were exposed to the air greater than 10,000 BC, back when the ocean levels rose 200 to 300 feet. Yamaguchi in Japan is a perfect example where it looks like something was built off the coast of Japan by human hands. It doesn't really look anything other than unnatural. And there are other sites around the world. There's one off the coast of India that's under 200 and something feet of water that looks like a city laid out 3 miles long and 1 mile wide with what looks like a grid pattern and little canals in between the roads where a sewage channel could run. That looks like an advanced city. And I think we're going to find that those civilizations existed prior to 10,000 BC before the ocean levels rose and covered them up.
Thank you. Next one is from Ryan again. What does David think of the von Braun or the firmament?
The von Braun what?
Firmament. Is it firmament?
That's something that might be beyond me too. I know about von Braun. I know that there are legends that the Germans had a captured UFO before World War II. I'm hesitant to believe that because, again, if they had that technology, we'd have seen it in combat. They would have used it right away. I'm also reluctant to believe that there is any sort of UFO Nazi connection in Antarctica. I know a lot of people have said that the expedition that went down there and supposedly suffered casualties after World War II, that was primarily us showing Russia, hey, if we have to fight in an Arctic environment, we can do that. And whatever casualties we had was because we were really woefully unprepared for the kind of extreme temperatures and wind that we faced in the Arctic. In the Antarctic. I'm not sure what the von Braun firmament is other than that. I
Right.
might have to look into that one.
I thought it was the firmament, the dome over the Earth.
Okay. I'm
That's what I thought.
I'm pretty sure we don't have a dome over the Earth. I think if we did, we'd see evidence of it being struck by meteorites. The Webb telescope already has damage from micrometeorites. It's only been up in
Yeah.
space for a month. The amount of meteoritic dust that hits the Earth is hundreds, if not thousands, of tons per day. And if we had
Yeah.
anything up in space that was between us and them, it would be struck so repeatedly that there'd be no way for us to not see that.
Right. Yeah. So I'm just looking up. Yeah, it's to do with the dome over the Earth, and then there's supposed to be water above that. Yeah, water everywhere. Have you ever is the phrase? So there's supposed to be water above this dome. So
Except this goes back to the old conundrum. If the Earth is resting on a turtle, what's the turtle resting on? And the answer in the olden days was another turtle. So
right.
if you had a dome, what's the dome resting on? It has to touch the ground somewhere.
Yeah.
Unless it's floating in space, and I'm not really sure we have anywhere near the kind of technology to build
I've no idea. So I'm just asking the questions. So blame the viewers.
that. No, that's okay. This is why we do science. We have questions, we have theories, and then we try to prove them right or wrong.
Yeah.
One of my favorite people that I studied when I was a kid. I almost went to West Point and had a military career, but then I couldn't swim 3 laps in an Olympic pool, so I chose an academic career instead. But one of the people I used to study was George S. Patton, military commander in World War II. And he once had a quote, "If I ask 10 men the same question and I get the same answer 10 times, somebody's not thinking." So the idea is you got to have new answers. You got to have new challenges.
Yeah.
You got to have new things to explore. Whether it makes sense or not, whether it's provable or not, those are the kind of things we need to look into. It's like Sherlock Holmes. Whatever you find, it's when you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of impossible and improbable things that we've had to deal with over the last few hundred years. It used to be impossible that rocks fell from the sky until the late 1700s when a meteorite fell and somebody went, "Oh, look, a rock from the sky." And they were able to finally accept that this is actually what was happening. We used to think it was impossible that the continents would actually move like an eggshell across the body of the planet. And the idea of plate tectonics was routinely laughed and thought to be impossible. And now we know it's real.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of things that we used to think were impossible that we now realize, okay, yeah, that actually is real. So I shouldn't laugh at anything. I once gave my MUFON friend a hard time because he was laughing at the reports of Mothmen in Chicago. And I said, you can't laugh at this. You have to take everything as seriously and as honestly as the people who are reporting it, because they may have seen what you were laughing at. And by laughing, you're taking other people and making them feel uncomfortable about sharing those same experiences.
Yeah.
So we have to be able to accept even the most impossible and improbable things as possible. So the von Braun firmament, I would only ask, what is it resting on? It has to be touching something somewhere.
Well, I'm presuming it's only works if you've got a flat Earth.
Ah, I see. Okay. Well, if it's a flat Earth and there's a firmament touching the ground, then there has to be a way of finding the edge. And that's one of the problems with the flat Earth theory. There was a Greek mathematician who wanted to figure out how curved the Earth was. So he did a very simple experiment. He put a stick in the ground in one place and then he went way south, thousands of miles south, and put a stick in the ground somewhere else, and he measured the difference in the angles of their shadows. And from that, he was able to calculate with a surprisingly good number of accuracy what the size of the Earth was. And with that, you can prove that the Earth is curved. It's not flat at all. We can also see every time there's an eclipse on the moon, we don't see a flat shadow, which a flat Earth would cause. We see a round shadow, because that round shadow is the sphere of the Earth crossing between the sun and the moon. That's the only proof you need to know that the Earth is not flat. The better question would be, why does our brain interpret the Earth as flat, and how can I teach my brain to understand that even though it looks flat, it really is curved? The biggest problem that children have when they're trying to walk, when they're infants, is that our brains see everything upside down. When you're first born, that's the floor and that's the ceiling, and it takes a while for your brain to realize, okay, I'm walking on the floor, even though my brain is seeing the floor up here, but I'm walking on it down here, and it takes us quite a bit of time. Animals don't care. Animals just, I mean, if a horse can't run in an hour, it could be prey for a wolf or some other critter. Humans have a much more developed brain, and we take a lot longer to figure these things out. And instead of thinking, why do I think the Earth is flat, it should be, is there something in my brain that resists knowing what science can tell us, because I am too attached to the physical dimensions that I think I see with my own eyes. And as soon as you realize, well, your eyes are lying to you anyway, because that ain't the ceiling, that's the floor. As soon as you realize that, then you realize, okay, I have to take into account my brain isn't always going to be able to understand the way the reality really is around me. The funny thing about both UFOs and the cars that Men in Black drive is that they both appear to us to be what we can accept as real. Some people can accept seeing a flat-sided, impossible, hovering, giant UFO, and some people can only accept seeing lights, globes in the sky, which is what I've seen. Okay, some people can't accept seeing ghosts, and maybe there have been times where people were standing right next to each other. One person could see something, and the other person right next to him couldn't see it. There's a really good story about Ivan T. Sanderson, who hatched the term ultra-terrestrials rather than extraterrestrials because he believed they came from other dimensions. And he and John Keel, who wrote the Mothman prophecy, John Keel didn't have any knowledge of the paranormal at all, so he went to Ivan T. Sanderson to get a little background. And he and Ivan were with their two wives at a place on the Ohio River just across from Point Pleasant where Mothman sightings had happened. And according to John Keel, a UFO came in from outer space or something, and just a basic silver disc, and then stopped and then started puttering along at about 100 miles an hour. And they're like, honey, do you see this? Do you see this? And the two wives are like, see what? They're like, right there, right there. And they're like, no, we don't see anything. And the two men could see it, but their wives couldn't. And then this UFO kind of fluttered, and then all of a sudden it's a Cessna. It's a Cessna airplane just flying along at 100 miles an hour. And the wives went, you mean, is it near the Cessna? And they're like, no, it is the Cessna. That's exactly what it is. And that shows us, if that story can be true, and I trust John Keel, then it shows us that they present themselves to us in a way that we are willing to receive.
Perfect. Thank you. Right. We have one last question, again from Warren. Does David think the SR-75 is real?
Yes. Well, there are a lot of black projects that even the real project is not necessarily what it's really supposed to be. I'll give you an example. There's a company called Microprose who back in the 90s had computer simulations that would allow you to do pretty much everything from drive an M1 tank to fly an F-15 and F-16. And supposedly somebody had leaked the information out about the F-19, which was going to be the new stealth fighter. And the Pentagon got so pissed off that they had this information leaked that they changed the name of the plane to the F-117. That's why it's got this really weird 3-numbered code, just to throw it back in the face of Microprose, who was coming out with a game that was not called the F-117, because they wanted it to be something that they wanted to call it what they wanted to call it. We definitely have, I think they're calling them single body. There's a special term for it. An aircraft where it's all one wing, but it's not exactly a wing. It's something. It's a single body shape. We definitely have drones that were flying like that. There are probably a lot of other things that we have. I don't think we have gotten to the point where we can have a plane hover without sound. I just don't think we have that technology yet. And I'm not sure that we can go faster than the SR-71, whose top speed is classified. We can learn a lot from the SR-71 in that it had so much friction when it was flying through the air that they had to leave expansion gaps in the airframe so that when it sits on the tarmac before it takes off, it literally leaks aviation fuel. And as soon as it takes off, it has to be refueled. And while it's flying, there is so much heat on the airframe that it expands and seals those gaps. We don't have anything that can get past that physical limitation.
Right.
So anybody that claims that we have a Mach 10 or a Mach 20 airplane, it can't fly in our atmosphere. We just don't have the technology not to have it expand.
Right. Excellent. Thank you. Right. And we're done. That's it. That is all the questions. Cool. Thank you so much for coming on. Go on.
You're welcome.
All right.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah. And thank you for coming on at such short notice and just managing to grab you before you go to bed.
Shh, don't say anything. I wasn't supposed to be up at 1:30 in the morning. I was supposed to be asleep.
Right. Oh, well, yeah. A long time before you're supposed to go to bed then. I'll back you a bit. Yeah. No, I really do appreciate you coming on. It's been absolutely amazing.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate the opportunity.
Definitely get you to come back on and do I'm going to say, if you come back on next time, if you want to talk about one half, we can do remote viewing. Second half, we can do the Knights Templar.
Oh, yeah, sure. And if anybody has any questions between now and then, put them in the comment section or put them on the Facebook page, and I'll look into them and I'll give you an honest report. And if anybody wants to read any of my writing, go to vocal.media and look for an author called David White. You'll see 18 of my stories there.
Excellent. And you're a group member as well, aren't you? Because
yes,
you know
yes,
Facebook group. Yeah. So you're on there. Yeah. Any links that you want to put on the description, if you send them to me, I'll put them in when I do all the editing tomorrow. Because I'm going to bed in about 15 minutes. I've been awake since 4 o'clock, so it's been a long day. So massive.
Just remember, when you go to sleep, when you wake up, however long it is later, you could be in a different timeline.
Probably, as long as I don't have to go to work, it's all good.
buy a Mega Millions lottery ticket, you could win $1 billion.
Oh, did that yesterday.
Oh, good for you.
Well, £2, I got my money back.
Okay.
That was about it. Better than nothing.
Alrighty.
So, massive thank you for coming on. Thanks for coming at short notice. Massive thank you for Joe for doing the moderating and sending the questions through to me.
Yay, Joe.
Next week, we have, I don't even know, I think a guy called George Mitrovic. Don't know if you've heard of him. He's in the group as well.
Mm-hmm.
He's an Australian guy. He's wrote about 1,000 books, I think. So, he's on next week for the second time. So, I'm going to play the outro video and then we'll have a quick chat before we both shoot off, if that's okay.
Cool. That's great.
Perfect.
Yep.
Right, so thank you everyone in the chat. Thanks for all the comments and the questions and everything else. And we will see you next week. And when I find the outro video, I'll play it. So have a great weekend, everyone, and take care. Good night.
Bye. Are you still there?